Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to discussing the Metacrisis. And I have my panel back, Michael Lopiano and Rogério Marques. Roger. Today we will do a follow-up conversation as suggested by Michael in the past live stream. A little bit more of practical solutions and proposal to mitigate the meta crisis. How can we make it better? So my first word would be to Michael. Michael, what are your thoughts after the last live streams, and what would you like to talk about today?
Sure. Well, last time we all spoke, and the last time we met together, we largely did something of a sort of mapping of this crisis, just to sort of get on the same terms, compared maybe some of our takeaways from this particular interview with McGilchrist, Vervaeke, and Schmachtenberger. And I think that was very useful. I think it was very helpful for us to sort of reestablish those terms. And certainly anybody who's with us now and watching this, I definitely invite you to come take a look at that, so you can be on the same sort of basis of terms and such that we are. Yeah, today I'd like to share with you guys, certainly our audience, and with both of you, maybe some of the elements or strategies, however you'd like to think about it, that I have tried to incorporate into my life since really over the past, I'll say solidly 3 years, but sort of going on 4, that I've looked into this and sort of had these ideas and had this sort of synchronous of mapping between some of these theoretical concepts and maybe historical precedents for, a meta crisis of this sort, right? This sort of unmooring, as it were, that may be causing some of this, all of these sort of different stemming issues. So yeah, I'd certainly like to talk a bit about that. See where it connects on additionally some of these maybe theoretical points as well that were brought up in this previous discussion, and maybe how it connects to each of our own sort of individual experiences and some of our reading and private thinking that we've done as well. And hopefully too, this will be a great opportunity for others out there who are listening, who hear this and engage with us. Maybe they have some solutions as well. We can connect and continue to keep this discussion going.
Thank you so much. Rogério, your thoughts, and I also, it's a little bit trick question, I also would like you as a warm-up for others to bring in your thought exercise that you introduced at the end of our last live stream.
Yeah, okay. So as for the speakers in the video we were thinking about and discussing about with these 3 individuals, to repeat their names, so Daniel Schmachtenberger, Ian McGilchrist, and John Vervaeke, they quite neatly summarized their own kind of theses and doctrines, which is to be expected. These are all individuals with hefty bodies of thoughts and theory. However, if we would, and we've discussed this as 3, if we would give them an overarching broad criticism, it would be, okay, you've described a bunch of theoretical concepts, but we also need to get practical. And if there is something that we might criticize the way human beings learn nowadays, and as not just the video by Daniel, Ian, and John, it is we tend to teach youth and children, youth and young adults, mostly intellectually, somewhat sometimes creatively as well, also very technically, in terms of procedures and practices, but in terms of character development, the character development that happens is quite in the wild. It's when people develop from impatient to more patient, from so quote unquote foolish to quote unquote wise. It usually involves something that happens to their particular lives that makes them unique, and it's a hit or miss. Sometimes people have experiences in their lives that make them realize things that are really, really important. They take with them for the rest of their lives and changes them utterly. But for the most of the people in the population, it won't happen to all people. Most people won't have the good fortune of reinterpreting a crisis as something that can make a person way better at having compassion, or way better at leadership, or better at persevering through hardship. And this is quite is not a desirable state of affairs. I think it would be much better if we could sort of complete the projects of our wisest ancestors. To give a very concise example, Plato, very concisely, he wanted to create a system that would create good leaders, the so-called philosopher kings, and also help people become more excellent in terms of their characters. And we have mostly continued the project of science, mathematics, STEM, intellect, laws, all the humanities that are much more intellectual, but they offer scantily in terms of character development. And well, this is at least my opinion for what we discussed in the previous session, when we described the metacrisis and its constituent polycrisis, which is, if we don't solve the character development problem of people overall in society, then as much intellect that people have, as much technical knowledge and technology people can make, if they aren't becoming their best self, probably they won't be the kind of heroes, epic heroes of today that we actually need to care about the problems and address them, even somewhat selflessly and with a sense of duty that is sorely needed. So I would say that we are in need of developing more ways in which people can learn. Perhaps we could move on to the thought exercise that we mentioned, that I brought up in the previous session. So to read it again and repeat it. So imagine that society and the biosphere collapse, and it's not until centuries of environmental recovery facilitated by, for instance, robotics and artificial intelligence, designed and built in an act of desperation, that a new first generation of human beings can be generated. Also by artificial wombs and created by robots. So a very sci-fi like mental experiment or thought experiment. Now imagine that you are the project owner of this project that will ensure the existence of this new generation. And so the question of arising from such a scenario is, what knowledge that we have achieved and accumulated will we leave to these future humans? Will we leave A, all knowledge without restrictions, or B, only the knowledge considered, quote, safe, unquote, excluding things like nuclear energy, recombinant DNA technology or molecular biology for genetic alterations, artificial intelligence, etc. Or C, we go clean slate, we leave nothing for them and let them learn everything for themselves. They start from scratch with no knowledge from us, ancients to them. Or D, we actually leave all the knowledge for them, but we lock the incrementally more, quote, dangerous, unquote, knowledge behind kind of a series of vaults where to access them they would need to achieve higher levels of competence in a given domain of knowledge or experience. And so I would say I drew inspiration for this thought experiment, one from a narrative of science fiction that is in a video game called Horizon Zero Dawn, and B, from actual Stoicism, from ancient Greco-Roman tradition, in which one of their practices that everyone can implement in their lives is negative visualization, or premeditatio malorum, as they would say in Latin. So these Stoic practitioners would imagine, okay, so in this context that I'm in, what is the absolute worst that could happen? And let me imagine the absolute worst happening and people dealing with it. What will go on? What kind of choices people will be faced with? And so let that inform my actions right now to prevent the absolute worst from happening. And also, if the absolute worst happens, at least I'll be kind of expecting it and prepared for it in a sense. But it's also very, very important to say that when we do these kinds of thought experiments, this is not the goal is not to terrify anyone, not to scare anyone. It's to kind of make people start to think about these issues, to see how high the stakes are, and to drive those creativity, those brainstorming juices, make them flow, and also analytical thinking and whatnot. So I'll leave it at that, and please feel free to proceed.
I would like Michael to start giving his proposals.
Sure. I mean, what comes to mind first to me, right? About how to respond to this problem. Okay, if we have to leave something, you know, what would that look like? You know, I don't know about necessarily what parts of knowledge I would delete or lock. That's a little bit more sophisticated. With some more time, I could probably think through that. But my first, what came to me first, was to leave some blueprint of how, and a sort of a philosophy of how-ness. And I'll explain what I mean by this. One of the things I think that draws me to McGilchrist as a thinker in particular, more so than it has to Vervaeke and to Schmachtenberger, although I respect their thought and their discipline of thinking very deeply, especially. But it is in particular that McGilchrist has his background, right, has an extensive experience as a psychiatrist, right? So he is a practicing physician. His first degree was in English philology, right, in English literature. However, he became very much disillusioned with that sort of pure academic, pure thought, pure theory approach to things, and he had become very disillusioned with what literary criticism had become in the 1990s in particular. So that was the reason for his first book, which is 1997, I think, is Against Criticism. And his major takeaway from that book, which Schmachtenberger actually references in the discussion, is that to make something explicit for the express purposes of making it explicit inevitably disfigures and deconstructs what is, you know, implicit. You will miss something by becoming analytical and becoming explicit about something, that there is always something lost by doing that. But so what interests me about that, right, is a lot of McGilchrist's thought from The Master and His Emissary and in his later work, The Matter with Things, even though he is very interested in philosophy and is very, interested in theory, he also draws a significant amount of intuition about the world and about how to live from his experience as a physician, as a psychiatrist. I noticed this in particular too about someone like Peterson, right? Peterson not only is a professor, not only wrote something like Maps of Meaning, he was also a practicing clinical psychologist, right? A clinical therapist for many decades, which also influenced that other side of things, right? That also influenced his thought and guided his thought. It is not just, well, this theory checks out over this theory, therefore, that theory is better. But these theories all together, when guided by this experience of practice, of kind of an embodied way of engaging with the world, these yield more insight than this does, right? This sort of works. This fits with experience. This not so much. And so this concept, I think, in particular, I don't think it's an accident. It's not only practice, but it is an orientation to the world as a physician. I think that is perhaps, if there was one single thing that I had to leave to future generations, it would be that. And there are two places that draw on this idea, right? That draw on the approach to the world, the ideal approach to the world, the ideal approach to civilization, the ideal approach to bettering the human species is to approach it with a how, and that how must be the how of a physician, the how of someone who cares for others, right? Someone who attempts to heal. And the two sources of this that I see very prominently come actually from, some of it come from, well, they come from very similar points in time, which is around the 1st century AD. One of them is much shorter than the other. One of them is the New Testament, built on the Old Testament, right? So the Jewish and Christian scriptures, the Christian scriptures especially, right? And the other is a curious allegory that was, it was read in antiquity. It was rediscovered in the Renaissance. It became extremely popular in the Renaissance, and actually in the 16th century, basically all Renaissance humanists, who were kind of the doers of the Renaissance, made this a fundamental part of their education. Basically, there are a number of people perhaps who are not so well known, but John Milton, for example, is someone who recommends giving this to 12-year-old boys as the beginning of their classical education. And that allegory is called the Tablet of Cebes, or the Tablet of Cabes. It's a very short allegory. There are a number of very interesting points to it, but it basically ends up in this conclusion that the way to true knowledge of the world, right? Because there is a way through false knowledge, and false knowledge is pure theory, right? Poets, peripatetics, pure Stoics, pure Epicureans, right? Whoever is getting in together in these schools and just doing pure theory, mathematicians, whatever, what have you, that's not real learning, right? That's false learning. It can be good, right? It can be good, but that's not real learning, right? Real learning is getting out into the world, navigating through the unknown, triumphing in the face of uncertainty through the cultivation of virtue, and then returning to the world as a physician. That's essentially the very, very boiled down culmination of this allegory. And it was produced at the same time as very close to the same time as the Gospels, which are a more elaborate narrative form of that incorporates a lot, right? There's a lot more in the Gospels, but one of those is as the presentation of Christ as a great healer, as a healer of nations. I think we often in English talk about Christ as being a savior, but of course this comes from French and then previously from Latin, salvator. What Christ offers in Latin is salus. Salus, a lot of the times in English, just gets translated as salvation, but of course this means healing, right? Salus is healing or health. In Latin, when you greet someone, you say salve, right? You wish health to someone, just in the way that in German at some point you would have said heil, right? Like health to you. Or in Russian, you say zdravstvuy or zdravstvuyte, right? You wish someone health directly, right? So there is this idea that the how that you should go, right, as just sort of a takeaway, right? The main example of Christ, right? The stories of Christ, you have 4 points of it with each of the Gospels. It also gets this sort of a lot of negation there too, like, hey, this is what being a healer is not. putting love as the highest value. But we get this illustration through the life of Christ, and we also get it through this allegory in the Tablet of Cebes, which is decidedly not specifically Christian literature. It may even precede the writing of the Gospels. We're not exactly sure. But both of these come to the conclusion that the how, right, you should live your life according to a how and not according to a what. It should have a qualitas and not a quidditas. The quid, the what, can be whatever. But the how, the qualitas, is non-negotiable. If you want to live if you want to optimize human life, everyone must approach life as a loving, caring physician. And so if there were some way, right, again, this was realized in the Renaissance and was realized as in some aspects of the Reformation through the Renaissance. And also, it does not surprise me that someone like McGilchrist or Peterson, who are also practicing physicians, someone like Carl Jung, who was also a practicing physician and said the same thing, basically came to the same understanding of the Metacrisis. And all of these guys have been trying to do things to address this. I'll hold off on more details. I'll hold off on sort of developing that anymore. I think I've presented this sort of the idea of howness and the physician is really what the practical solution boils down to, and how that in some form I would leave, right? I mean, maybe I leave them the Tablet of Cebes, this future dystopian society. I just make sure they have the Tablet of Cebes in the Gospel or something like that. But I'm interested to hear what you think of that, both of you.
Want to go first, Kara?
I actually think it would be better for you to address Michael's points, and after that, I will kind of try to answer your thought experiment a little bit from my point of view.
Sure.
And short commentary on Michael. Yes, it's very interesting.
So I would look at the
little delay here.
Oh, okay. Sorry about the delay. I can't do anything about it, so I'll try to be as clear as possible. Yeah, I really liked your thoughts on this, Michael. I'll try to add to them, to complement them. I really don't have anything to kind of rebut them or disagree with them. Actually, I will try to pick them up and go further. So there is this whatness about knowledge, that the knowledge, if it stays in the whatness, it is kind of sterile and dead. But then there is the howness. It's kind of like the techne for the Greeks. So pragmatism. So putting things into practice. People in some traditions like Wang Yangmin from the New Confucians, who I'm a fan of, he would even go so far as to say knowledge and action are two sides of the same coin. You cannot say that you have any knowledge if you aren't doing something with it. You might even be fooling yourself or deluding yourself, which is very, very easy to do. So putting things to the test, do a robustness test of the models that you're holding is very, very important. But I would go even further by saying there is the whatness of things, there is the howness to employ the knowledge, to make the knowledge live, and there is also the beingness, which is, if you aim to become a doctor, you will not just be doctoring, even better with the years of practice and learning. You will also start to be a doctor. So a doctor, an excellent doctor per se, is a person that very characteristically is a person that cares about others and tries to minimize harm as much as possible in their practice, which everyone knows that medications have possible side effects, risks of harm to health. He will do his utmost, and also surgeries and whatnot. There's no surgery without some harm, some cutting, some recovery needed of this harm done to achieve the benefits. So there's always weighing the cost and the benefit, the harm and the healing benefit of everything a doctor does. And the same goes when the treatment is entirely mental and the therapy is entirely psychological, for fields of people like Jordan Peterson, Carl Jung, Viktor Frankl. I especially am a fan of Viktor Frankl's ideas in his Man's Search for a Meaning, because it really screamingly comes from practice. The man is describing his direct experience with very extreme situations, human situations, of dealing with the hardships of concentration camps, like in Auschwitz, and his this merging with his a priori psychological knowledge that he then kind of puts into practice in his path through all these hardships, and then he writes about it after he comes out of hell, basically. And so, in all the thinkers of human history, I'm most drawn to people that I can see attempting at least to put their theory into practice. And I've seen this happen with Plato when he tried to put the Sicilian tyrant in better working order according to his republic, but he failed. Even if they fail, at least they tried. At least they tried to put their theory, and they weren't merely armchair philosophers. Another example is Musonius Rufus, who is the less known of the four later Stoics, Marcus Aurelius Seneca and Epictetus. Musonius Rufus was sentenced to exile more than once, and he made the best out of the exile possible. Like he was sent to a deserted island, and he transformed the island into a kind of a garden with vegetables and whatnot. He basically homesteaded the arid land into something better, and he transformed that place that would be his kind of island prison into a place of learning and philosophy that drew students there. So it went very, very differently to what the tyrannical emperor wanted in his exile, probably. I would also like to read a very short excerpt from the same story that gave me this thought exercise. It's a kind of like a new kind of gospel to show how, when we show characters in a story, we can show learnings that are impossible analytically and theoretically. We show that there's an underpinning below the words that is transcends the words. It's kind of like if I challenge anyone to explain the color red or any other color to a person who has never seen color, or to try to imagine a color that they have never seen, or new colors outside of the visible spectrum, everyone will be at a loss for words, most likely, because this is also to show the limits of our spoken and written words. They have several limitations that we must know about, and we shouldn't pretend that everything can be done with knowledge. Some things can only be done through experience, and thus one of the best ways to experience things very, very quickly and share experiences is with stories. And so this very short story by this character, Elizabeth Sobek, who is the character that actually ensures the future continuation of human life on Earth after the complete catastrophe that happened in the story. And so she tells her companion AI, it was a children's electronics kit, but I'd hacked the wiring to an auto battery and solar photovoltaics, so the grass caught fire. So an experience she had when she was like 6 years old. And so she goes, and so did a large pine tree burst out in flames that had been there, I don't know, maybe 100 years. I was 6 years old. My mother was home, thank God, so she called the fire department, and after she took me to the lawn and showed me the dead baby birds, because there were nests in the pine tree. I don't remember how I felt, I'm not sure. I remember yelling that I didn't care. And that's when my mother took my face in her hands and spoke. She said I had to care. She said, Elizabeth, being smart will count for nothing if you don't make the world better. You have to use your smarts to count for something, to serve life, not death. And so it's almost impossible to experience this kind of gut punch to the gut in terms of, yeah, you could be an intellectual superpower, the most smart person in AI and robotics in the world. But if you lose your caring about life, you could absolutely leave everything to fall in calamity, and the absolute worst could easily happen with all this power being wielded without any wisdom. And so, yeah, I'll leave it at that, and please feel free to go on.
Okay, thank you. So far, if you have noticed me typing a lot, it has been background live streaming services that were happening. I was talking to people individually, and a surprise for my guests. So in about half an hour, I will open the room for 60 minutes of guest appearances, but the guests I know personally, and Rogério knows everybody, I think, because he's been in the circles around. We will have Wolfie for sure from Australia, who stayed up so late just to join and talk about Metacrisis with us, and possibly more guests. And coming back to Rogério's again, thought exercise, which I find extremely interesting, by the way. Again, the knowledge that we will leave. So provided there is this catastrophe that happened, and we can't be there, all the knowledge we have gathered will be lost, or we can leave it to the basically infantile stage of humanity to repurpose or relearn and things like that. So what do we do? So I was thinking about Star Trek. They have this prime directive where basically no knowledge will be left, zero interference. But this is applying to the new planets, and the knowledge itself isn't lost. The knowledge is kept within people who are using it. And there are new planets who are starting from scratch, and let's say developed civilizations like, we will not interfere, we will not help, we will not give our knowledge. But in Rogério's case, there is a difference here where the knowledge will be lost if we will not share it. Whatever we have gathered will be gone. And there is this hope, which is a new kind of hunter-gatherer type of level human beings. And what do we do? In that case, if it's if the people will need to spend another, I don't know, thousands of years to gather or to get to the level we have, I would actually go for the point B, which is we will leave them knowledge that is safe. We will leave out nuclear energy and molecular biology, because to be honest, people don't need it for happiness. And because my own personal bias here, caring for human happiness, people do need some basic knowledge. So perhaps, let's say, I would give them some sort of a Bible, because Bible doesn't have nuclear energy and AI or like none of that. Bible has like this sort of basic guidelines. So that's what I would do. I would go for B. Yeah. I would like Michael to go next.
Well, sure. I guess at this point, my question, I had a question for Rogério, which was based off of the question I had at the beginning here, and at the end of last bit there, right? You know, I was very interested to learn more. Right, you are so passionate about character education, which was a crucial part of the Renaissance of the 14th and 15th century, right? Which was using using the organization of classical moral philosophy, which was being recovered from through the translation and copying of texts of the ancient world, but teaching it alongside as well, right? Teaching it alongside Christian wisdom. You know, the ways that the humanists were able to do this, right? They were primarily interested, right? They were not primarily academics. They were not primarily interested in working through the universities. Some did, but again, they had this perspective that the universities were too concerned with Aristotelian disputation and dialectical method and nominalism and thinking about, for example, one of the questions that's always brought up, right, is this famous question of, you know, the pointlessness of asking the question of how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, something like that, and having, you know, a treatise that goes on for hundreds of pages, you know, going over this in theory, and, you know, what a worthless pursuit. Right, they were very interested in well, recovering ancient texts because of the modes of presenting this information, in part. So the ways that the ancients presented and composed information about character development, their pedagogical methods. They were interested primarily in say, the founding of new schools that taught specifically material from the classics. And as a result of this, as a result of them having a pedagogical and character-forming mission, it was largely because of the humanists that the printing press came into use and came into circulation. It largely emerged to serve early on the interests and needs of humanists who were both communicating with each other and had the need to produce materials in large numbers, very inexpensively, for students. The 15th century in particular was, you know, in the 15th century, there was not only developed the press, but an advanced rate, some of this in the 14th century, but new ways of developing cheap wood pulp paper. And so being able to sort of print these cheap and easy kind of student copies of things in the 15th century, right, that and the Bible was kind of like what people, you know, what people printed, but also printing the Bible so it could be cheaper, right? Rich people, universities, they're more than happy to do manuscripts because the manuscripts looked way nicer. You could illuminate them, and you know, they lasted longer, right? They were durable. Vellum manuscripts were more durable. Paper was a like it's not a permanent material to write things on. So it wouldn't look as nice. And of course, they wanted to have these beautiful display libraries, so they did manuscripts. So my question for you in this sense of, you know, so what practically do you think? Well, I guess it's a two-part question. What practically do you think we could be doing to actually get this kind of characterological or character education project going or spread, or how to really implement that at a detailed level, number one? And I suppose number two, which kind of feeds into that, right? You can sort of generalize from this, is what are you doing now, right? You're motivated in this. Have you put thought to this? Are you starting up any projects? Like, where are you thinking practically in how to bring about this kind of you know, renaissance in character education? I'm very interested in that.
I want to address it shortly before I pass it to Rogério.
Sure.
What I think should be done at the moment, being, let's say, an observer of current society, I notice that people learn via video games and YouTube videos at the moment, some sort of Coursera courses. The knowledge is spoon-fed with sort of reward attached to it. So what I see as being implemented is sort of a video game way of learning things, but the moral kind of dilemmas being solved with kind of people giving some scores, replaying the scenarios even in VR, let's say. So that's like it's actually felt on a skin in a way. Yeah, that's the way I think. I'm not necessarily thinking it should be this way, but this way I think it might work, if it makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to add to that. So I'll say both what I'm actually doing about it and also what I think could be done even more. So one of the things is I'm building community. I'm finding people that all are already kind of Renaissance men and women, and I'm just bringing them together to a garden of Epicureans, so to speak, quote unquote, or the Christian commune online, in which we basically have what we call the good conversation. We let the living voice live, actually. We try as best as we can to listen to people's positions and ideas as non-judgmentally as possible. Let them kind of think their doctrines and axioms and whatnot to the utmost end, so that if they are not on a good path, that they can realize it for themselves. Also foster this idea of traveling through many different cultures, as many as possible for each individual, for them to at least savor the differences and the similarities between I don't know, Greco-Roman, Hellenistic, and Sufi, and Chinese and Persian and Indian traditions, and many more, African, Mesoamerican, if possible. Even if they don't kind of scale the entire mountain of a single tradition, be it a religion, a philosophical school, whatnot, to at least be able to talk as authoritatively and from experience as possible, to teach others. Others could be also people that are way, way ahead in other mountains, so to speak. And I think it's important to not judge these mountains at face value as one being superior to others, because I think such tremendous value can be gained from the comparison, from comparative philosophy, comparative mythology, comparative religion, and even the comparisons between different scientific traditions. Because it's crazy that there are different scientific traditions and different empirical systems, different epistemological systems, different systems of ascertaining and deciding what is considered the truth from these different traditions. And in human history, when gains of wisdom and philosophical systems and religions kind of bubbled up, most was when there was a kind of coming together, a merging of different traditions, like Ionia in ancient Greece was a merging of Egyptian, Babylonian, ancient Greek, and even from the North Persian, to coming together these different traditions, and people from these wealthy cities like Miletus having the wealth enough to travel to points as far as India to actually experience what it is to be in a different tradition and then realize, oh, these things that they are doing differently, these are all arbitrary, different traditions from different places. Like all these islands in the Aegean Sea have all these different ways to praise their gods and whatnot, all these different rituals and whatnot. And they would, the merchants that would be traveling merchants, they would be among the most skeptical of people because they have seen it all, so to speak. And they would have a different perspective. Their perspective would shift, like the perspectives of Solon, Plato, Hecataios, and Herodotus when they visited Egypt, and they said, oh, my family tree goes back to 16 generations back, and then there was a god like Poseidon or something like that. And so humanity started there. And then they see in this temple, like the temple of Ptah in ancient Egypt at the time, which was called the land of Chem, by the way, not Egypt. They would see like the statues of the lead master of the temple master, going back 300 generations, so 300 of documented generations. They would be absolutely mind-boggled to see that almost everything that they held true in their own tradition was just, lies and bullshit, because it wouldn't fit with all this other evidence, material evidence. And so it's a huge blessing and a huge boon of shifting of perspective to kind of travel, either physically or mentally in different traditions. So I think building communities, traveling through different traditions, either by actually reading the source texts of the traditions, kind of ignoring and assuming that the popular conception of Stoicism, Cynicism, Epicureanism, yoga, Buddhism, etc., are entirely wrong. The popular conception of them, just dismiss it systematically. It seems like a systematic error that our society produces, that these things that are very, very complex, the popular notion is just throw it away and start to read the actual source text and maybe even some commentary as well, to get a feeling of what they are actually thinking about and doing. And also some practical things that I've gained from some of these wisdom traditions is things like the Stoics would praise seeking discomfort, leaving your comfort zone. And so I tried for at least a month incrementally to bathe with increasingly colder and increasing amounts of colder water, to the point that I can actually shower with cold water, no problem. As long as I did some workout before and my body is all fired up, mitochondria are at their max, I can shower with cold water, no problem. Just like the ancient Romans did with their baths. They had the frigidarium, cold water, tepidarium, room temperature water, and caldarium, hot water, for different purposes, and also subjecting the body to these changes of environment systematically is kind of like making your body voluntarily be subjected to some hardship, some controlled hardship, which will toughen up your immune system, circulatory system, nervous system, etc. And this can be applied mentally as well. So even though you won't be dragged and put in the same situation, and maybe it's for the best, as Viktor Frankl was, it's absolutely probably for the best, you can still kind of picture yourself in it by reading Viktor Frankl's work and kind of trying to put yourself in his shoes and experience at least vicariously these kinds of hardships, like the Stoics would want people to do, to kind of employ negative visualization to get yourself, at least in thoughts, outside of your comfort zone, because the comfort zone is not where character development happens. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I like this idea, right? So I see that sort of what I get from this. You have okay, so maybe three things kind of stand out to me from what you've presented here. Working backwards, you have expose yourself to challenges. So this is kind of zone of proximal development, type thing, or expose yourself to different hardships. Personally, doing things like that in your life to try to cultivate that character in yourself. The second one you said was sort of adopting a sort of aggregative mode of study, something like that, where you try to explore kind of as much difference as possible in so doing sort of instantiate like an archetypal formation process, something like where you try to get as many exemplary patterns as you can, and then sort of aggregate them as to what sort of the ideal commonalities are maybe between them, and then apply that insight to one's own tradition, something like that, as sort of like a mode of going about learning. Okay, so that's a cool how. Did I get that right? That part was right?
Yeah. Like Seneca basically exploring Epicureanism systematically. He kind of got outside of his own camp and brought in learnings from others.
And the first point you said then was also building community. So I'd like to follow up on that point, if I can, if that's okay with you too, Kara. I'd like to ask you a bit more in depth about what you're doing specifically. Like, what is your method for building community? What is your means of building community? How do you actually go about that? What platforms are you using? What is your way of sort of hosting this or reaching out or something like that? And how do you envision, how do you conceptualize what you're doing there as far as your means of building community? And where do you see that going? What are you trying to do with that? Where are you, how far, like, lay that out for me maybe.
Yeah, sure. So I'll go down to the operational basics and the what and hows. So my Twitter started as basically my kind of mental notes of whatever it is I'm studying, and to kind of give them life by sharing them with random people who I probably don't even know, and they can kind of add their thoughts, and we can even sometimes discuss, like what happened with Kara. I basically met Kara on what was Twitter, now X, when I shared something about friendship. I quite remember, and so it opened so many possibilities just for having that encounter. It really was the stuff of building community. And the two places that I build community is on Discord. I have my own server that is both a repository for stuff that I am learning, and other people who are learning can also deposit there links and short biographies of different thinkers, and language and philology comparisons and whatnot, whatever might help. And the other place is a kind of a chat, a group chat in X as well. When I find people that could be in this chat, I start to invite them and see how it goes. And often what happens is they might kind of butt heads at first with other people that are there, but they will kind of gain from that, even if it's at first maybe sometimes unpleasant, because people argue and discuss and don't agree with each other. But it seems like it's bearing fruits, and so it's little by little growing. It's a bit also experimental, and I'm learning as well a ton from it, because I'm kind of challenged to employ stuff that I've been learning from human nature, from Robert Greene's laws of human nature, his laws of power as well, stuff that I've been learning from Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, stuff that I've learned from the Platonic dialogues, the Upanishads. So all these kinds, and the myths, Homeric myths and whatnot, to kind of foster character development, and also to see any red flags of people that are absolutely not going to kind of contribute. So I try to a little bit kind of scrutinize people to see if they're awakened to this possibility of non-judgmentally listen to others and just participate in the living the living voice or the good conversation. And it's also starting out like this, but it won't be easy, because always there will be difficulties, but I think it will be very, very rewarding. And so, yeah, I hope I answered your question, but feel free to ask more.
Yeah. So yeah, that's super helpful. So definitely, right, looking at, I've sort of had a similar realization in terms of these different social media outlets, right? And that, they strike me in a way as the printing press of the Renaissance, right? They have a similar role, and they have a similar sort of, they allow the generation, right? It's interesting. It's not just, it is a communication medium, right? Like a book is a communication medium, but there's also, like, the relationships of booksellers and printers and these authors, right? There's this sort of democratization, or democratization maybe is not quite the right word, but a dissemination, right? There's been, right, like a revolution in the distribution of the means of conducting serious, creative, and like learned investigation. That there was sort of a process of sort of, publisher and the involvement of, these extra university literary circles through the exchange of letters, like the humanists had their connection to maybe political institutions or church institutions or something like that, to businessmen, right, in commerce. And that this opened up investigating the world in a very unique way in the Renaissance, in that the scientific revolution, for example, was not born of the universities. This is an important thing to grasp. The scientific revolution was born of people who were rejected by the universities. Not necessarily maliciously, but just like, you don't really think like us, we're just not really interested in having you here with us. Kind of something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so, the scientific revolution as a paradigm shift in sort of how to conduct this kind of exploratory, creative engagement with the world became, localized outside of it. And then the universities slowly, gradually, because the humanists themselves had built this secondary school infrastructure beneath the universities for a century or 2 centuries, then the people who got into university had all been raised on and educated into humanistic method and values, that then we had this sort of brilliant transformation in the 18th and 19th centuries, where then the universities are all built on the foundations of humanism, and now they're all doing, now they're places where science gets done. And so I think that there's something similar might be going on here, with Discord or Twitter or YouTube, like we're seeing here now. In that, my position, what I think is that this is, I think maybe Peterson has said something like this, I don't know, like maybe with respect to Joe Rogan, that this is there is a sort of an institutional centralization of this ability to do this type of learning and engagement and networking and thinking and sort of creative process has once again, right, there's been this kind of power shift and this dynamic shift where sort of while the universities have been doing their thing, right, this huge parallel infrastructure has been simultaneously generating kind of alongside them. So I'm very interested, because I'm exploring this myself as well. It is very interesting for me to hear sort of what else, what other methods or means that you're taking with respect to this, and that others are as well, right? And I hope that by listening to us have these kind of conversations, right, maybe other people can go like, hey, wait, maybe I can do something like that too, right? I mean, all of us, we don't have tremendous followings, but I've begun to realize that so much of what I thought perhaps could only be done at a university level or in a university context can happen and can actually be generated outside of it. So that's very interesting to me, and thank you very much for sharing that. Kara, was there? I think you may have posted a question. Is there a question you wanted to move to?
Yes, I wanted to move to a question about how can we kind of make our right brain and left brain cooperate, but through the framework of Ian McGilchrist's work, Mastering His Emissary. And I will ask the question again a little bit later. So I would like to address my own personal experience in community building. So I started in 2020 with the poetry platform on Twitch and Discord as well. Community, we had like over 200 people in the community. It's basically people from all walks of life, but who were united by something. They were united by poetry, let's say. And other than poetry, another point of unification was the platform that they used to cooperate and to talk to each other, which would be Discord. So there are 2 points of touchdown, let's say. Yeah. Hi, Wesley. And I try to understand people who have different beliefs, who came from different countries and different backgrounds. And finding something unifying in there. Well, it is still work in progress. Like it's 3 years later, I'm still doing the same thing, let's say. Okay, and right now the room is open. Wolfie, you can join if you like. You got the link in DMs. Welcome Wesley as well to the room, and I hope Christian from Agapologia can also join. So my question would be, so in his book, Master and His Emissary, Ian McGilchrist argued that that there is a fable that kind of can be used as a metaphor for the cooperation in between right and left side of the brain. And just roughly speaking, very generalizing, the right side of the brain would be the master, and the left side of the brain would be the emissary. And the master has the vision, has all the ideas, and he kind of able to see 10 steps beyond. And his emissary is very like kind of short-sighted, and he's very technical. This means he knows how to do things right here and right now. And the master was kind of tired of doing the little things, so he kind of delegated that chunk to his emissary, that left side of the brain. And left side of the brain, upon receiving the power, decided, well, why do I need the master? I actually am pretty capable. And like kind of sort of took over. So the question is, if our rights of the brain, the visionary, doesn't want really to control, he has the vision, but he's like very open-minded. Like he doesn't want to lead, basically. How can we combine those two? How can we make those two cooperate? Because it is true that somebody who is very practical and right here and right, and to do, and like this engine type of being, that type of thinking is very powerful. Let's say it's very, very straightforward, and basically those type of people take over. And how do we make master and his emissary to cooperate with each other, like without belittling one or the other? And yeah, welcome, Wolfie. Rogério knows Wolfie, I know Wolfie, and I would like to introduce Wolfie to Michael. Wolfie from Australia, and basically at this hour, it's like deep night, 28th of December.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, welcome.
Yeah, I'm pulling an all-nighter for you guys, pretty much.
And from the future.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's definitely been interesting just sitting back and listening to all this, and me just like peppering and weaving in a few comments here and there, and on the chat, and yeah, you guys are talking about some pretty interesting stuff. I'm liking it. It's good. And then hello, Michael.
Hi there, Wolfie. It's very nice to meet you.
Yeah, man. Likewise. So, yeah, from what I'm gathering here, it's the battle, between the hemispheres, I suppose. Which one leads, And I think it should possibly be like Alan Watts spoke of the yin and yang, and he said that both separate parts of the yin and yang symbol have both light and dark inside them. Okay, like the spots inside them. And he had it on a pinwheel, and he said, whilst we have our perspectives, and he just looked at it and he said, whilst we have our perspectives, something along these lines, that are isolated. We can never see something from another perspective sometimes if we're so resolute in maintaining our own. And then he spun the pinwheel and it turned grey. And that, I think, to me, symbolizes that it's a dance, it's an interplay, it's something that we need in order to control our perspective, our way of looking at life. We need to look at it from an experiential place on the journey. We have to do it just through experience. We have to do it by being adventurers in this life. And sure, there's time to sit back and contemplate, but man, there's 8 billion people on this planet. It's a diverse and wild world out there. It's there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. And you guys like great commentary on this topic. Like, I'm just sitting back listening. So, I'm by no means an expert on this sort of thing. I've learned a lot of my philosophical sort of understandings, I suppose, from Rogério and also just life, but things that Kara has done and stuff like that. So I'm glad to be a part of this. It opens my mind. It's good.
Okay, Rogério, you shared something. What is it?
Yeah, so it's something that is not just a sample from what came related to what would then develop as the Renaissance. Please, Michael, feel free to compliment me on this, because my notions of dating and whatnot is way more fuzzier. But it seems that when people at a certain time in late medievalism started to really gain interest in the stories, the kind of didactic stories of the antiquity. This is for sure a story that is not geared towards the refinement of intellect. It's for sure to show that there are these characterological facets of development that are also extremely important. Each person, practically every single day, is kind of seduced to choose stuff that just feels good and will have later unwanted consequences. And also between that and things that are less pleasant, but will, if you embrace them and you go through them and with patience and face the kind of hardship that they entail, you will build yourself better, basically, little by little. So this is a painting from the late 16th century representing the choice of young Hercules Hercules at the beginning of his heroic career. He's a young adult, and he is confronted in the beginning of his path by two goddesses. The goddess to the right presents herself as the goddess of beauty and pleasure, and she offers Hercules a lot of tempting niceties of life, luxuries, delights, pleasures, games, games that now are video games as well. Entertainment in the form of the theater mask there, music for entertainment in the form of that musical instrument on the lower right. Then we also can see the grapes of wine and Dionysius, and also this goddess of pleasure, as she puts it, is also very seductively dressed to kind of draw the visual attention of Hercules, while the goddess to our left is the goddess of excellence or virtue. And the goddess to the right, as she portrays herself fakely as the goddess of pleasure, she is in fact the goddess of vice. And if Hercules would have chosen her, there would be no heroic deeds and 12 labors and so on and so forth. And apotheosis, Hercules is rising to Mount Olympus to be one among the gods after all his trials and tribulations. And so let's see if I can move to the second image.
Before you move on, Rogério,
yeah.
I see that she's also pointing over to the Pegasus on the mountaintop.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, go on your journey, continue. This is like a distraction kind of vibe,
Yeah. So to me, this is kind of like a figment of institutionalized character development that they were trying to enact, to put into place. I have no idea how many people at the time saw paintings like this. If it was just for a small elite, probably so. And so if it was not entirely democratized, because most of the people were actually farmers and illiterate farmers, and they didn't need any per se character development to continue just farming without need for either intellectual development or character development or literacy or whatnot. But this kind of painting nowadays, that we actually need character development for everyone, literally, because everyone is engaging with social media, sometimes even with broadcast media. And people have professions that they deal with IT, and some people even with AI. And so people are dealing with things that are powerful, wielding things that are powerful. And so much more important for character development.
I actually think another problem too, Rogério, is that the confirmation bias involved in immediate gratification and I suppose justification of someone's points of view, on the internet. So if I get a really bad attitude and other people feel the same way, they'll just reinforce it and lock it down, So the internet kind of plays into that thing where you can actually get celebrity and you can get famous for not having admirable characteristics, from not being a well-rounded individual. You can actually not have the character building parts required, and yet you will get praise and admiration for being, I suppose, an incomplete person. And that, just simply because it's style over substance or whatever. It's ridiculous to me. The age of convenience, where everyone can be praised for doing not much, but just having a big smile on their face and telling some jokes or something, I don't know. That's why I'm glad I'm here, because you guys are actually talking about some of this stuff. It's better than the alternatives that are out there. It's good stuff.
I'm wondering what Cara and Michael also thought or felt by seeing this piece of art. So
I am a bit distracted by the by the chat. Please do not mind it. It's a separate conversation that is going on. I actually do like those kind of out of the subject mind exercises as well. Yeah. And internet is wild place. There are people from all walks of life and who have their own vision. And some people might call it insane. I don't know. I just find it interesting. And yeah, maybe there is some wisdom and insight gained in a gesture. But here, in when you're talking about the actual painting, I always look at the wooden club. I don't know why, but it's like an undressed, completely naked Hercules. But why does he hold a wooden club? And so our clothes is sort of like our armor in a way. We hide things. And a wooden club is a weapon. And so if we have no armor, but we have a weapon, what does it tell?
You know what? Can I say something on this topic? I just had a thought that maybe it's the inverse of what it's used for, because he's leaning on it. Like, he should be out there battling the forces of evil, yet he's using it like a crutch in this respect. You see?
Yeah.
Nice. Michael?
But potentially, I mean, potentially as regards the symbolism of the club, part of it is that if you're going to paint Hercules, right, this is the way that art also has a kind of symbolic grammar to it, especially in this period. It's not something that we're very much used to in modern art, which has no rules and therefore looks like nothing most of the time. But right, Renaissance art and Baroque art has a very rigid set of it has a symbolic grammar to it that is carried over across all images. Part of it is, if you're going to paint Hercules or sculpt Hercules or put Hercules anywhere, you have to have at least one of two symbolic elements. You have to portray him with the club, or you have to portray him with the skin of a lion.
Yeah,
wearing
the
skin of
Nubian
a
lion. Yeah.
You have to have those, at least one of those two. Better if you have both.
This is pre-12 labors. It's the beginning of his career.
Right.
So the club was the only option, I guess.
So I don't quite know what leaning on the club might signify. I haven't contemplated this particular piece of art to that degree. But you know, because this symbolic grammar was taken very seriously by Renaissance artists, right? There is nothing that is in the painting is a mistake. That is, nothing is arranged in the painting that is a mistake. Nothing, generally speaking, nothing is in the painting, is arranged in the painting that is not consciously thought to be arranged in this particular way. So to that point, Wolfie, although I don't necessarily know what to think of the club in this position, I would agree that with you in sort of thinking about why in particular the club might be oriented that way. And you might be onto something insofar as it might have some particular signification. I don't know what that is, but
I just think that if you look at it like it's a seduction of the vices, you know. So he's get the idea that he's giving into he may possibly give into temptation because he's sort of just like, you know, leaning on it, like it's some, you know, the idea of like resting on one's laurels kind of thing, you know, like it's almost what he's doing with the club, because it should be he's a man of action, yet he's, you know, in this position where he's just, you know,
yeah, but look at the direction toward where he is leaning. He's leaning toward the goddess of excellence, the god Arete, but he is looking back to seduction. So basically, it's like his mind and his heart and brain are kind of clashing.
In two minds. He's
Yeah.
in two minds.
Yeah, he's of two minds, like Homer would say so many times during the Iliad and Odyssey. He would say this example, this phrase. He's of two minds. So there's an inner conflict there, and I think this is also intended to portray an inner conflict there, and so many other things that I kind of picked up and labeled there. So the labeling was my kind of attempt to do an exegesis of the painting.
And he's also a demigod, so he's got the the duality of the god and the man. He's wrestling with both sides of himself. And in this respect, we could probably look at it and say, obviously the godhood, or his birthright, is calling to him, but he's succumbing to his own humanity as well. He's tempted, but at this point, it's just a point of contemplation, really. He's in a degree of puzzlement, I believe, just sitting there with all this commotion going on around him. He's like, what is happening here? And just really contemplating everything.
So I think it's astute to bring up this particular point of two-mindedness. I think it connects well to Kara's original question here regarding the master and his emissary, right, and the hemisphere hypothesis by McGilchrist. Right, you do see this two-mindedness used quite a bit in Homer, and it's very clear as well that, right, the writers of the New Testament are familiar with Greek culture to a great extent, right? The Epistle of James, in particular, speaks about two-mindedness, and then post-canonical literature, things like the Shepherd of Hermas also speak quite a bit about this idea of two-mindedness, of being in two minds, of bewaring the people who say one thing and do another. It's similar but not quite the same as Christ's beware the wolf in sheep's clothing, something like that. So there is this problem, right? McGilchrist in particular, in both of his more recent works, talks about the issue of specifically of sort of the way that hemispheric perspective phenomenology works, or how it works inside us. And there is the key problem is that we have a tendency throughout our lives, right, as we age, right, in coming of age, we have a tendency to favor the left hemisphere. We tend to like the left hemisphere. The left hemisphere does respond to the sort of pleasure that's promised by Kakia here, right, in your image. The left hemisphere is more dopaminergically motivated. It is more motivated by the pursuit of things rather than the fulfillment of things. The issue with the left hemisphere is, right, it maps as well to Jordan Peterson's concepts of chaos and order, of explored and unexplored territory. And McGilchrist's issue, basically what he sees as the great, self-destructive pathology of the left hemisphere, is that the left hemisphere does not know what it does not know, right? The right hemisphere is always aware of what it does not know, but the left hemisphere is only aware of what it knows. And any information that it has is passed to it by the right hemisphere, and it is the right hemisphere that mediates between the inner world, right, our psychic mapping of the world, and the world out there, right? And the issue with this, however, right, is as we come of age and as we develop our left hemispheric capacities, right, we become more adroit, as it were. We become accustomed to our familiar territory. We like our familiar territory. We like our routine. We like our predictability. But in so doing, right, we run the risk of basically walking ourselves off of a cliff because we fail to take note of what is actually out there in the world. So this is a really fundamental problem. There's a lot of this in McGilchrist. I won't go into too much detail, but there are sort of two elements that stand out to me to address Kara's original question here. One of them is something which Jordan Peterson has said quite a bit, and it is that he's talked about his sort of concept of the logos, or where he sees the Judeo-Christian logos, as he calls it, and that of Hellenistic philosophy, where they converge, is upon a principle that mediates between order and chaos, which he also associates with the exploratory hero, which also Carl Jung does as well, right? Carl Jung, I guess, calls it something like the self, something like that, which it's, you know, is what you should truly identify as, right? Carl Jung talks about the self as in full individuation and psychic development is what you should identify with. And it is a self that is greater than just the ego consciousness or the unconscious. And sort of Jung's personal unconscious and the ego conscious are somewhat synonymous with inversively, respectively. So ego conscious for Jung is something like Peterson's order, something like McGilchrist's left hemisphere. Also Henri Bergson talks about this, right? So what he would call the intellect. And the personal unconscious for Jung is the right hemisphere for McGilchrist, is the master for Nietzsche, right? Because this fable is from Nietzsche. Right, there's a synchrony of these sort of principles that's being gestured at, and sort of what Peterson's idea there is to identify not with the part of you that says it is I, right? Not the ego consciousness, not the left hemisphere, not the ordering principle, nor to identify with the chaos principle, the principle of the right hemisphere. Since both of these on their own have their deficiencies. Although McGilchrist properly, I think, analyzes that the human body, when guided exclusively by the left hemisphere, is worse off than the one that is guided exclusively by the right hemisphere, something like that. Although they're both useful. That what you ought to identify with is the process that mediates between the two. You should not see yourself, you should see yourself in part as either one, as both, but not as either one, but rather as you should identify with that exploratory process that mediates between the two. And there's something like this in, well, yes, the example of Christ as a mediator, but then also with Socrates being the wisest man in all Athens, who is the only one that he admits that he knows nothing. And there may be something to that. I think probably if you added in McGilchrist and a bit of Jaak Panksepp and Jung as well, you might refine that into, well, it's not that we know nothing, it's just that we can't know anything to any certainty. And the things that we have the highest certainty of, right? Really what we know, we don't really know things. Really what we know are just things that are mediated by our experience. And I think, right, to answer this question, how, at least as far as these different thinkers we've engaged with, how do we actually get to this kind of, opponent processing, linked poles? How do we make sure we're in that mode? I think that sort of Socratic dictum of kind of remembering that in all that you do, you don't know, right? Anything that you kind of know is always bounded by uncertainty. So whenever you're having a dispute, right, always remember that there is at least some, there's always some door there that leads you out of the realm of certainty. Because when you are absolutely certain about things, absolutely certain, will not even entertain the possibility that there is some part of how you've configured the world that is perhaps not exactly correct, is when you get into the left hemispheric pathological orientation and sort of hierarchization of your cognitive structure, something like that. So the way that you do that is to always remember the limits of yourself as a knowing creature, something like that. And then to follow the example of the exploratory hero mediator, something like that, having both of those things together, having that epistemology and then embodying that epistemology in an exemplar of action, which is perhaps something like, right, the archetypal hero the example of Christ as mediator, or of Mercury as psychopomp, right? Something like that, person that mediates between the two, right? You can synergize a lot of these things, but that is certainly my position on that. Maybe we could talk a bit more about what that practically looks like, or certainly you can feel free to disagree with me on any of those points. I'm not sure, but that was sort of my orientation towards the question.
If I may compliment you on that, so the emissary is treated here in the story a bit like he's a cannonball or a rocket, because he is kind of discharged by the master to do all this delegational functions in the world at large, and things go wrong. There is no kind of error correcting mechanism, for one, and also the master, apparently, although he is wise in the ways of looking at things from a big perspective and looking at the gestalt of things, as I've understood from McGilchrist's description of this story, apparently the master, and this was one of the things that they briefly touched upon, was the master apparently did not have this wisdom of looking at the character of his would-be emissary and figuring out this emissary is the best person for the job, and he won't screw things up. While apparently the master in the story had some naivete and he selected an emissary that actually ruined things, and maybe the lack of communication between them two, as in the lack of connection between both hemispheres really spell doom in this story, which is a story that I only know superficially by their account. I haven't yet read the book, but at least this is kind of like the lessons that I gained from it. We really need the master and emissary to actually communicate so that they can complement each other and figure each other out, which further enhances the importance of self-knowledge. Basically, we really need to employ whatever it is we can to improve our self-knowledge by whatever means that exist, that we can get from all these different wisdom traditions. Of course, not every single person will like to meditate. Not every single person will like to do musical audition like the Sufis do. Not every person will want to do kind of ayahuasca kind of thing trips. Not every person will want to read mystical poetry, and so on and so on and so forth. So many different ways of improving, enhancing, developing self-knowledge. But at least if people have things there that are visible for them to consider, to adopt, and figure out what works better with their personality, at least there's the choice. And so I think this story also enhances the importance of self-knowledge, as the Delphic maxim, know thyself, would go.
I've got just a point to make. When it comes down to I haven't read this book, but when it comes down to the sort of two-mindedness of left versus right hemispheres, and the logical mind versus the creative, emotional sort of thing, I don't think you can evenly say with any certainty that one is inherently the left a virtue and the right being a vice. I think that both of them have the actual ability to be either or, virtue or vice, depending on the perspective you look at it from. I think definitely, it depends on where it's directed.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there, Wolfie. That's also McGilchrist's point there, right? He's not saying like, oh, the left hemisphere is bad and the right is good, or the right is bad and the left is good. No, the issue comes when they are not in the proper asymmetrical configuration. This is an important element to McGilchrist's argument in both The Master and His Emissary and The Matter with Things. that there is a fundamental asymmetry to the right and left hemisphere, that their structures are asymmetrical, their views of the world are asymmetrical. For example, they're different for they experience different forms of attention, and they produce different forms of attention. The left hemisphere, for example, is responsible, and Peterson also talks about this actually in his coursework. The left hemisphere, for example, is responsible for attention that is focused through about the 2% super high resolution vision of the middle of your eye. And the right hemisphere is responsible for all the panoramic vision, like attention, not vision, but attention around that. Actually, both receive halves of the visual field in terms of pure sensory information, but the attention through the visual field is different, right? The left hemisphere, very, very focused attention, particulate attention. Right hemisphere, panoramic contextual attention. So it's not that these are necessarily bad, right? Or that in any particular sense they're bad. This is actually, right, something else that appears in the tablet of Seebe's that I referred to earlier. None of this inherently in and of itself is bad. What becomes bad, what becomes issue, what becomes pathological for ourselves and for others is when the wrong asymmetry is in place. In a certain way to think about it, I think I expressed to myself at one point. I don't know necessarily if this exact formulation has been put in any of the people I've been talking about, but you can sort of distill this from what they talk about. The difference between the attention or modes of attending to the world that are representative of the left hemispheric and right hemispheric perspectives, their modes of attending to the world. The left hemisphere, its mode is similar in all that it does is similar to something like precision. However, the right hemisphere is concerned with accuracy. You can have something which is accurate and not precise. You can have something that is accurate and precise, or you can have something that is precise and not accurate. When you're choosing ways to go about your life, it's better to go about it accurately. It's better to go about it accurately and precisely. But it is of no value of you to go about it precisely but not accurately. You can aim at something in a very detailed way. You can focus on a very particularly detailed point. But if it does not have accuracy, if it is not a good thing to aim at, it doesn't matter how detailed an understanding of it or how closely you can hit that target if you don't want to be aiming at that target at all. So the idea of the asymmetry problem as McGilchrist presents it is that you want to asymmetrically shade to the side of accuracy rather than precision. But that doesn't mean that you should completely forego precision, but that precision must always be nested hierarchically within accuracy, right? Precision must only be in the service of accuracy, which is where that kind of master emissary element comes in there. And the way that you do that, yes, there is a deficiency that can come in the left hemisphere where it becomes, right, superbus, it becomes proud, right? Pride is something that comes from the left hemisphere. Arrogance, right? The left hemisphere is arrogant. The right hemisphere, however, has a responsibility to observe the left and to something like not abrogate its responsibility, right? Not go to sleep, not become the blind king, like Osiris, say, in his myths that allows Set the ability to kill him, right, and to overthrow him. So something like that is involved, refraining from the abrogation of responsibility, especially of responsibility for yourself. There's something like that. The right hemisphere might have a tendency, I don't think McGilchrist touches on this, but the right hemisphere may have, he talks about it in the sense that the right hemisphere may become hypercritical of itself, right? It may become sort of self-defeating. And maybe there's a responsibility in the right hemisphere not to become overly self-defeating and self-deprecating, something like that, to the point that it would allow a left hemispheric perspective to dominate it. Maybe we can think about at some point what that means, maybe in experiential terms, right? Because we experience this as us. We're not like, oh yes, there's my right hemisphere. Oh yes, there's my left, right? We experience this as a sort of composite us. So I think maybe I don't want to talk too much, just sort of at a clip without giving people a time to think or digest or respond to this and contribute their own elements. But transferring that kind of thing, at least something I'm sort of working through on my own time and in various things, is sort of working over that theoretical frame or that structural frame into an experiential context where I can say, like, okay, this is what it feels like to go ahead and go through that process.
This relationship between the two hemispheres also reminded me quite a bit of Aristotle's vision of what it is to be excellent. To Aristotle, it actually is him basically looking at the Middle Delphic maxim here and scrutinizing like 13 different domains of being, and pinpointing the extremes of these domains of being. And for Aristotle, his virtues are all moderations, basically the means between extremes. Like, let me just give you some examples here. So, like between rashness, which is like recklessness, and cowardice, so people that don't even leave their comfort zone, versus people who are just thrill seekers or something like that, and so on and so forth. While Christian and maybe even Hindu virtues are complete withdrawal from some aspect of life, some person completely relinquishing, for instance, sex by becoming celibates or something like that. So it's a different way of looking at things. But I found in relationship to Ian McGilchrist's ideas, also Vervaeke's idea of the exaptation of the cerebellum, which is responsible physically for coordination and some balance, to perhaps being interacting in terms of the cognitive neuroscience kind of things, to also facilitate the balancing between extremes of operation, to bring about justice, the virtue of justice. And so there probably is a great purpose to think about balancing between extremes and seeking moderation in general in life. Probably it's way easier to democratize moderation, or the mean or the middle way, as Buddha would put it, between extremes of being, than to try to democratize some kind of extreme. So also Aristotle's Nicomachean ethics are extremely interesting. I would say that Aristotle's Nicomachean ethics were the kind of atomic habits of his day, and James Clear is kind of like the Aristotle of this day, because both of them offer people actual practical advice to put in place in their own lives. Aristotle, because he was looking at a class full of aristocrats that wanted to get into politics, and they wanted to be excellent individuals. And James Clear, because he started blogging about self-development, and when he actually wrote the book, people were actually asking for him to put his blog posts together and actually write his atomic habits. So yeah, these concepts of character improvement might be useful.
I have a kind of an idea, bouncing off the commentary from Mills in the live chat section. So basically, for the master and his emissary to cooperate together, there should be understanding, basically understanding of what is happening, understanding of the both goals, the aims, the task ahead, plus the arena itself. Also with understanding of capabilities of each of them. And so the emissary should understand what he is capable, but also what he is incapable of. And the same is for the master. Yes, in the live stream, like in the video with Daniel Schmachtenberger, Emma Gillichrist, and John Vervaeke, they talked about this sort of master being unwise. It was like master was too far in his own kind of spectrum of being a master, other than understanding the reality properly. Like you have to be closer to the emissary in a way. I talked to to a friend of mine. She's a university professor, also not in neurobiology, but she does kind of work in a similar area, and she did her research there as well. And to Wolfie's point, yes, both half of the brain, they can have, they can work in different kind of, just what that, I'm trying to think.
Specializations, perhaps?
No, brainwave,
brainwave frequencies, perhaps?
Frequency, yes, the brainwave frequency. Both of them can slow down and have like different brain waves depending on the state that a human being is in, like depression and stuff like that. Actually, both hemispheres slow down in a way. And when a human being is highly functioning, both hemispheres, the brain waves are kind of like the frequencies
are matching more or less and higher. Yeah.
Yes, higher.
Maybe,
and the actual reciprocity between those two is better.
Perhaps more harmonious than kind of dissonant.
Yes. I do understand my own lack of English knowledge, a knowledge of English language. So basically, what needs to be done is the general understanding of the situation. Again, the salience landscape, understanding of the arena where we are performing at, basically, and also the roles and the aims. So if our goal is to build, again, coming back to Tower of Babel, if our goal is to build a tower which is that high and has that many floors, right? And there is no dispute among the people who do the actual construction, this goal can be achieved. And I would argue that the actual conversations are necessary. Yeah. Or like the video game that would teach us to understand the other point of view, like general education, but also the conversation among people of kind of who are like the communication between masters and emissaries in a way, like the absence of disconnect. I don't know if it all made sense, but guys, we are finishing in 12 minutes. This means everybody gets just like 4 minutes of time. The three of you will get 4 minutes of time to get a closing statement. I would give first 4 minutes to Michael. Michael, you're on a clock.
Sure. Yeah, great. I mean, sort of building off of your comment and building off of this, Rogerio's comments here about, know thyself and self-knowledge, especially. I remember in particular, right, there is, well, right, Carl Jung himself went through a very, very serious investigation of himself, beginning in 1913. Right, this was the time that he had, he began exploring the active imagination method. He walked away from his academic career at ETH Zurich. He cut off relations with Freud. Right, he had the split from Freud, and this is where he said he had the sort of a year of, he was stricken by a creative illness in which he was able to discern basically all of the raw material that he said became the basis for all of the books that he wrote for the rest of his life, all of the work that he did in his clinical practice, everything that he explored. And part of this, which he revealed in the Red Book, which was released in a reader's edition in 2008, with a preface by Sonu Shamdasani, revealed really the depths to which Carl Jung realized what was within him as a human being. And he explored these through this active imagination process. Peterson also talks about having done something like this, insofar as he's talked about contemplating the fact that as a human being, he was forced to realize, this was through him contemplating the Soviets and the horrors of communism, and contemplating the Nazis and the horrors of things like Auschwitz, and reading books like Ordinary Men and The Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn. And he talks in particular about how the most important thing that he came to as a conclusion regarding this was that he realized that he as a human being was capable of everything that they did, that he could do all of the terrible things that they did. He also talks about this moment where he met, for example, he was thought he was a hotshot. He was at a prison, right? And he met some guy, a very unassuming guy who was in prison, who was perfectly nice, seemed like a nice guy, whatever, but was in prison. The head psychologist told him, because he had held up two cops at gunpoint, made them dig their own graves, and then shot them through the back of the head while they begged for their lives for the sake of their children and families. And Peterson is very particular about saying that you must contemplate who you are, that if you do not realize that you are the type of person that, like, absolutely you could be capable of doing what was done at Auschwitz. You could be one of those ordinary men. You could be, under the right circumstances, you could be that guy that goes along with Stalin or Mao or Lenin or Hitler or whoever. It could be you. You definitely would. And if you refuse to accept the fact that it could be you, that actually increases the likelihood that it would be you. And so I think if I were to, perform this kind of experiential translation from this allegorical mode of the master and his emissary, and sort of, well, what's this question of what is the master supposed to do to make sure that the emissary, doesn't get out of control and do his own thing? And I think it's exactly that type of meditational exercise, that contemplative exercise that Carl Jung and that Peterson engaged in. Insofar as I think that what we all must do is we must look within ourselves and say, what truly awful, horrible things must I be honest with myself about that I'm truly capable of? What unspeakable horrors really could I do if I decided that I wanted to do them? And to take that very seriously, because I think doing that is that process of the master taking responsibility for the emissary. I think that specific contemplative method, doing that with yourself, is taking your master and ensuring that the master knows the emissary that he is sending out. I think that's what the process is. That, I think, is what I would like to conclude on.
I wholeheartedly agree and subscribe. The self-knowledge and the knowledge of others, so as to be appropriate judges of character for whatever it is we are endeavoring to do, whether it be recruiting someone to work with us at the office or to embark on a multi-generational project of kind of making a second Renaissance or something like that. However high the stakes are, even more important it is to have confidence in character appreciation of ourselves and others, and to kind of slay hubris in our own selves, just as you said, Michael, to realize when we, for instance, read Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, the Ramayana, Mahabharata, all these epic myths, we end up realizing these are theses on psychology and the possibilities of human history. With all these archetypes, all of these characters that are very caricatured and emphasized from, for instance, Olympus, are all aspects of human psyche. Every single person on the planet has the potentiality to have the arrogance of and also overconfidence of a Zeus, or the mischievousness of a Hermes, or to be so drawn into whatever it is they're doing or seeking, like Aphrodite. They kind of are erotically attracted to stuff and actions and whatnot, or they have bloodlust and vendetta like Ares. All of this is human potential, and if we don't know it, we kind of have a vulnerability to have buttons pushed by others or by the circumstances that will pull on us or push on us like a puppet. And that's the last thing we want. We don't want to be in part overruled as if we were kind of beasts or something like that. We always want to have our best, noblest faculties, reason and wisdom, to call the shots and to kind of do the verification process and the vetoing of whatever it is our impulses are pulling us towards or pushing us towards. And so, yeah, self-knowledge through so many of these different approaches, one of them being, of course, studying and comparing mythology. These are very, very important indeed.
Wolfie?
Well, yeah, great points, guys. Holy crap. I don't think I could follow that up very well, but I was going to say, I think it really comes down to, we're talking about the left and the right, I suppose what we give our power to, really, isn't it? And it's a negotiating process, I think, between virtue and vice in every action that we take. I'd like to think it's an ongoing process for me. I'm working on things that I can, and I think, the idea that someone could definitely be scrutinizing over their own behavior, to the point where they beat themselves up. I'm known for this myself, but also to accept the things that maybe you're failing at a little bit, but to also 100% celebrate your successes, and to allow yourself, I think, the grace to know that you're only human, and that other people are going through similar experiences. This is, as I think I said this at the beginning, like the duality between all things. You've got the positive and the negative, and the logical and the emotive, and you've got light and dark. You've got all these things that are swirling around us at blistering paces in society right now, and just the world, and who knows what's actually happening out there in outer space, interstellar realms, different races that are on other planets with their own problems, pitfalls, and successes and virtues. And this is the only planet we know, and I think we owe it to ourselves to try to better it for each other. And I think the struggle to maintain control over one's, the instincts, the primal, and to get that into a point of personal accountability, to be like, I will try to own that as best I can. As Rogério said, so we're not just beasts, we're better than that, and that we can achieve so much greatness, being that it's tempered by reason, and also that it's tempered by just patience and compassion, and that we do things hopefully as a race, but it starts in the individual. And I think there's a knock-on effect. As soon as you start to work on yourself and you try to improve who you are, And to be easy on other people, I think, is another thing. Like, be okay with people. Know that no one's perfect. Aim for something better, though, I think is the main notion I take out of this particular talk, is that the noble pursuits of a virtuous existence, of wisdom, logic, reason, knowledge, of compassion, love, kindness, all these things are important. And I think a balance between all these things, so we make proper decision making, and we can hopefully be both leaders, but also allow other people to take the burden. So it's a shared burden, is that, I think the idea was that, what aspect of ourselves do we allow to lead? And we've got to think about that with others as well. And what aspect of themselves is leading in an actual leadership format. I think to be gentle and kind with each other is the essential thing. But also to reprimand when it's required, hopefully done in a distinctly graceful manner, with humanity. And a balance is really what I would like to see in this planet. In the human race, I would love to see a balance. I'd love to see not necessarily a compromise, but just people aiming for something better. And I think we're all trying in our own way. But this is what this is all about, these discussions. And thanks for having me, by the way. Really appreciate it. But that's my closing statement.
Thank you, Wolfie. I will add the details about Wolfie, in the description to this channel. Wolfie is a musician, and he just recently released a couple of new albums for the Christmas.
Yeah.
Please check it out.
Yeah.
I also have my own. True. I have my own collaborative album with Wolfie from our last 2 years of collaboration or something. But I know Wolfie for 4 years now, and it had been like a long musical kind of union in a way.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy to have you here. And
thanks,
Michael. Soon, Michael has a series of very inspirational videos on Instagram, also on Twitter, and soon on YouTube. YouTube is just starting up. I will add again the YouTube also to this video a little bit later. Please check it out, subscribe, support. It's just the early beginnings, and we all do appreciate your kind of just even little things, likes and shares and following and stuff like that. And Rogério, who also does the same thing. He has a YouTube channel and really interesting videos and live streams as well. Please, guys, check it out. And I'm sure Wolfie and Michael will be their guests pretty soon. And I'm pretty sure Wolfie volunteered some music for Rogério's live streams as well. Which is nice. Guys, again, thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Rogério. Thank you, Wolfie. Thank you to all the people in comments, everybody. I wish you Happy New Year. I think it's my last live stream. I will publish some videos, but as a live stream, it's probably the last one this year. And I'm honored, to be honest. Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year. Okay, guys, you can